Very recently, I was able to speak at a Gresham Chamber of Commerce event, and this is an annual event that's held here at Mountain View Christian Church, and it's a breakfast fundraiser for my father's house and the Snowcap ministry here in town. And my assignment was to talk about the reason of the season and how important generosity is right now. And as I prepared to speak, I did just a little bit of research and I learned some things, and here are the headlines that I found. Highly religious people are less likely motivated by compassion than non-believers. Atheists are more motivated by compassion than the faithful. And so another headline was why non-religious people act more out of empathy than religious people. Or children from non-religious homes are more generous than their peers. And I kept thinking about what would I say to both believers and non-believers, and it occurred to me that regardless of our faith journey, I think we all recognize and we all understand that we have been born to live generously, to live generous lives, and it's probably something we all agree on. And I will say this. Compassion and kindness and generosity, they are absolutely supposed to be the marks of Christianity. When we look at the early church, the writer Luke wrote a book called The Gospel of Luke, and he also wrote the book of Acts. And he describes in the book of Acts what a vibrant, committed, Jesus-focused community looks like. And so in Acts chapter 2, Dr. Luke says they had favor with all of the people. And why was this? It was because they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And all who believed had all things in common. And then it says this, that they sold their possessions and they gave to anybody who had need. In Acts chapter 4, Luke gave a more complete description of what the early Christians looked at. It says all the believers, they were united in heart and they were united in their mind, and they felt that what they owned was not their own, so they shared everything they had. And I love that, because this is one of the significant reasons people don't actually want to come to church. As a pastor, I hear things like this, well, the church just wants your money. And I ask people, do you really think all we want is your money? And when they answer back, I say, actually we do, but it's not for the reasons that you actually think we want your money. The reason we talk about generosity is so much bigger than money. And I know God is at war for the hearts of humans. And I know that I want to join God in that fight for my own heart, and I want to join God in the fight for your heart. So to better understand, I want to tell you a quick parable that we find in Matthew chapter 25. I believe God has placed every one of us here on this earth to use our talents, not just for ourselves. A talent is considered something that might be worth 20 years worth of wage. And so Jesus tells a parable about some servants and a master who gives some talents to his servants to take care of. And the parable goes like this. A master is going to go on a long journey, and so he gave one of his servants 5 talents. To another servant, he gave him 2 talents, and to another servant, he gave him 1 talent. And this is what happens. The one with the 5 talents goes out immediately and he doubles it. And so he has a total of 10 talents. And the guy with 2 talents, he goes and he gets 2 more. And so he has a total of 4. But the servant who had 1 talent, he goes and he digs a hole and he buries his talent right there. And eventually the master comes back and he's going to collect what he loaned them. And so the servant with 5 talents gives back the 5 plus the 5 he earned, and the one with 2 talents gives the 2 talents plus the 2 he earned, and then the one brings the 1. And this is what happened. The master celebrated and congratulated the servant with the 5 talents and said, well done, good and faithful, good job. And you can imagine how this went. And so the one who had the 1 talent and hid it in the ground, the master condemned. And so let me explain something really quick. From Matthew chapter 25, verse 14, it says, for it'll be like a man who's going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. And that phrase, his property, is so important because we need to understand that everything belongs to the master. It is the master's wealth. It is the master's property. It's the master's belongings. It is the master's talents that he gives them. And so in this parable, God is the master and we, the humans, we are the servants. And too often, this is what happens. We get into what I call an ownership confusion issue. We forget who owns all the stuff. We forget who it all belongs to. Now get this, this is easy to do because you and I, we are born into selfishness. We are born into brokenness. As a matter of fact, think of if you have kids, what were your kids' first words? No, and the second one was probably mine. And you even hear it now, well, that's mine, or no. And you can imagine that this is just a part of who we are. And so when we believe we own everything, one of two things happens. We either become incredibly arrogant or we live with scarcity. We think we'll never have enough, and we're always trying to get more. Psalm chapter 24 says this, the earth and everything on it, including its people, belongs to the Lord. The world and its people belong to Him. So understand, God is the owner of everything and we are His servants. And so there's something else about this parable that I want you to capture really quick, and it comes from Matthew 25, verse 21. It says, his master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. A little. A little. This is fascinating to me because the master told the servant with the 5 talents that you are faithful with just a little, but understand that a talent was maybe the equivalent to a bag of gold or to 20 years of income. And the main point is to God and God's economy and the way God thinks about things, our money is just a little thing. And so generosity really does become a matter of this ownership issue. It really has to do with our view of God. And who we think owns everything is really what our view of God will be determined by. Our view of God is whether or not He's good or whether He's bad. And if we have an abundance, we have everything we want, everything we need, and we can see God that He's generous and He's loving and His gifts are endless. But then those are the first 2 servants. But then if we're like the one servant who kind of had this attitude of, well, I don't have enough, I need more, then the view of God, the view of the master is not very good. Look at Matthew chapter 25, verse 24. He said this about, the last servant said this. He also had received the 1 talent, came forward saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man. You reap where you do not sow and gather where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid. And I went and I hid your talent in the ground. So here, have what is yours. Basically, this servant says to the master, or this servant says to God, this isn't yours. You didn't earn it. I worked for it. You think you own everything and you don't own everything. And so he says that the master is a hard man. I share all of this with you because I believe that if we're really going to live generous lives, then our view of God is going to be critically important. And how we view God is going to determine whether we will be generous or not. Paul wrote this, and this is how I want to end this talk today. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17, he says, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty. Tell them not to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but to set their hope on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. It says this, they are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous, to be ready to share, thus storing up for themselves treasures, a good foundation for the future. And so let me challenge you this way. Let's live generous lives. You were born to be generous. I've been born to be generous. How do we do it? Let's be consistent. Let's just become regular, generous people. Not just consistency, but let's be sacrificial too. Let's not give out of the abundance. Let's give out of need and necessity. And so I challenge you to live what you were born to do. And what you're born to do is to live generous lives.